Peter Milligan, who's a special guest this month at 6:30 or 6:41 in the UK at the moment. So Peter, we're very grateful that you would get up so early to spend time with us, and a great topic that we have. But a little bit of an introduction. As you know, we don't do long introductions in these programs. It's all about the conversation. But Peter and I, a very, very long time ago, probably approaching 30 years ago, worked together briefly. And we've sort of been in touch off and on. But over the last couple of years, we've been having a regular conversation online, some of them we've recorded that you can view on YouTube. But Peter's been a psychologist now, Peter, for 30 years.
Yep, pretty much.
And he's a great friend, and he's a very smart guy as well. So
undoubtedly one of the smartest you'll ever meet.
So you will enjoy.
And humble.
You will enjoy
yeah,
the
humble as well.
And Peter's worked with all sorts of organisations, including Rolls-Royce. But today he's going to share with us some ideas about how to love living in your learning zone. And as always, we'll start with a question. Peter and I were working out what are the good questions to ask him. I think the classic one, Peter, would be, why is it even perhaps more important and challenging at this time in history to love living in your learning zone? Let's start there.
Yeah, well, there's a great quote that I came across a few years ago by someone called Tom Atley, and it said, things are getting better and better and worse, faster and faster. I just love that quote because it just feels so true, doesn't it? I mean, it's like everything's just running faster and faster. And I think we've got to acknowledge that the primary reason is technology. And the thing about technology is it just amplifies everything. It makes it bigger, it makes it faster. And obviously that's a double-edged sword for humanity, because all of the good stuff about human beings gets amplified, but all of the bad stuff as well. And I mean, you know, there's plenty of examples. You know, obviously technology enables us to do this. I mean, this would have been unthought of a couple of generations ago, that we could sit and talk and no delays. You know, it's real time. We get the visuals, the whole thing. So it connects us in a way that, you know, we could never have imagined a long time ago. But that same technology also sucks us in. And when I talk on the subject, I've got a great photograph of a young couple sitting on a sofa, and they're both just totally engrossed in their mobile phones, you know. And I think one of the things that social media does is that it can pull us in. It's designed to hook us in. It's the attention economy. And you know, so you know, we're actually not having time with our loved ones. It's quite funny. I've got two grown-up sons. One's 25 and one's 19. But over the last few years, we'd sort of laugh because often we'd sit down for dinner, and my wife, you know, would be bloody texting friends and stuff, and we were sort of thinking it's meant to be the younger generation, but it affects all generations. So that's, you know, that's one aspect. Another aspect is that technology enables us to make more stuff, you know, whether it's physical stuff or information. We can just produce so much more, so much quickly and cheaply, but we end up drowning in it. We drown in physical stuff. We've got pollution, you know, rubbish everywhere, you know, crappy products all over the place. We're just drowning in stuff and information. Well, we all know we're overwhelmed by that. So, and then technology enables us to harness the power of nature. You know, we can, you know, everything that we have in the modern world is thanks to our ability to take energy and harness and direct it, which is fabulous. But our ability to do that also means we can literally wipe ourselves out. So I was born the year that John F. Kennedy became president. So while I'm running around like a little, you know, toddler doing what toddlers do, here's Simone.
Hi, Simone.
Hello, apologies for late. I've had to come in from another meeting.
Okay, that's
no worries.
You're
our token woman, Simone.
It looks like I am.
There's meant to be 3 other women here, but they may show up. We'll see.
We've just begun, really, Simone, and we're exploring the first question to Peter, which is, why is learning even more important and challenging at this point in history?
Yeah, so just to recap what I was saying, Simone, is that you know, we're living, there's a great quote, things are getting better and better and worse, faster and faster. And I think essentially it's because of technology, which amplifies everything about human beings, the good stuff and the bad stuff. So I was just saying when you came online that, you know, our ability to harness energy is also our ability to completely annihilate ourselves. And I grew up under the mushroom cloud, and that hasn't gone away. Our ability to wipe ourselves out is always there. So, you know, it is a really, really crucial time in human evolution, really, because if we don't change, there's every possibility we can literally annihilate ourselves as a species. So, you know, and I think the point is technology itself won't solve anything. It's actually human beings changing the way they think. And there's a great quote by Einstein. What is it? No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. So the consciousness that built the atom bomb isn't going to be the same consciousness that, you know, ensures our survival as a species. So I think, you know, in a nutshell, learning is really important because we have to be open to learning. And I think one of the challenges well, obviously I'll dive into it in more detail when Ian goes through the other questions, but if we stop learning, we will stop growing, we'll stop moving towards a state of wisdom, and therefore it doesn't look good, to be brutally honest. So I think we have to learn. We have no choice nowadays.
I love this phrase that you use, Peter, moving towards a state of wisdom. I wonder what Donovan and Simone, you think. I think it's a wonderful line.
My question is, what does wisdom actually mean?
Let's go there, because it's a key part of learning, right?
Yeah, I mean, we slot that in. I think I think throughout history there have been individuals who have tapped into timeless wisdom, because I think timeless wisdom is really anything that taps into universal principles. They're not opinions, they're not just ideas that some human beings dreamt up. It's something that we look at it and we go, yeah, there's something in that, and we kind of recognize it. Whether we actually are able to live by it's another matter, but I would consider wisdom to be having a deeper understanding of universal principles. And I think human beings often just ignore universal principles because it often doesn't suit their agendas.
One such principle might be that what goes around comes around.
Yeah, and the sense that everything's actually ultimately connected and we're ultimately all one. You know, it's this idea of being separate, which I think is the cause of all of humanity's ills. I in some of the talks I give, I have I talk about human ego, and I say, you know how you're walking down the street and you'll see a sign on a gatepost that says "Beware of the dog." And whether there's a dog there or not is beside the point. You know, it's beware of the dog. And we should have signs in our cars, in our homes, and in offices saying beware of the ego, because the ego is this sense of separate self. It's like, you know, I'm right, you're wrong, my needs matter, your needs don't. You know, it's that attitude that creates all of the problems in the world, whether it's in business, whether it's, you know, in politics, you know, internationally. And, you know, wisdom is understanding that ultimately we are all one. Yes. I think there's nothing like a pandemic to suddenly highlight that fact. You know, you can't say, oh, those poor people in Bangladesh or, you know, wherever, you know, that's really sad about them. What's the next item on the news? Collingwood beat Carlton. That's a tragedy as well. But, but you know, we say, well, that doesn't affect us. But suddenly, I was with friends the other day, actually, and I was saying, I'm really looking forward to a day we can just have a conversation. It isn't about a bloody pandemic, because whoever you talk to, you know, you talk to friends anywhere in the world, and it's like it comes up because it's going on. But I guess in a way it's highlighting the fact that we're all interconnected.
Yes, and I think it highlights too, really, what I would say, that, you know, there really is a war of the worlds going on right now, because there are those who want us to stay separate. The best example, of course, is politics. You know, the Republicans and the Democrats is the one that's in the news, of course, at the most. And it seems like both sides want to be separate from the other. Here in Australia, we've got the same thing going on, where, you know, the Liberals want to blame Labor and so on. It seems to be this eternal separateness rather than understanding that we are indeed one. I would say that I'd say wisdom is a successfully applied knowledge. And one of the things that you've only got to pretty much pick up any best-selling book right now, and you'll see the story of oneness in there in some way. I'm reading Humankind right now, for example, by Rutger Bregman, the Dutch historian. And it's a story about how humans are fundamentally good, not bad, and that history is actually telling us a lie in many ways. Fascinating book.
I would challenge your statement that wisdom is applied knowledge, because I think it's applied with love, because, you know, building an atom bomb is applied knowledge. You know, knowing where to drop it to do the most damage is applied knowledge. So it's got to be knowledge applied with love, I think.
Yeah, no, I love that. I would concur. Yeah, good. Other thoughts on this? We're talking about the importance of wisdom in the whole topic of learning.
Yeah, particularly in the modern era, more than ever.
As we know in these gatherings, silence is okay.
Jamie's just blissed out on the beach there.
I know, yeah. I'm
enjoying the hair ruffling, you know, being ruffled by the wind in the palms there.
I missed the first couple of minutes. Well, we're severely short-staffed here at the moment, so I've sort of got a sort of number of things out, but I apologise I missed the first bit.
No worries.
It's probably a good place, Peter, because one of the questions that you and I talked about was the idea, because I think what's driving the two worlds, particularly those that want to sustain separateness, one of the tools that they use is fear. And I'm interested, Peter, I know you and I privately have had many conversations about this, but the relevance of fear in the learning process, you know, what is the relevance of fear in the learning process?
Yeah, fear's a really, really important emotion to understand. And most of my talks that I give, I actually kick off with that as foundational, because I think if we don't understand fear, it controls and drives us. So I think the important thing to understand about fear is that first of all, it is tied to learning. It's also tied to our avoidance of learning, which is why, you know, I thought I'd call this session, you know, love living in your learning zone, because it's got to change the learning experience from one of fear to one of love. But fear is biologically wired into us. You know, we know that the fight, flight, freeze response to any perception of threat. So it's, you know, that part exists in the core of the brain, and we share it with all other animals. You know, and it's very much about survival. But it's almost ironic that for human beings, it's actually almost unhelpful in some ways. You know, obviously, when you're further down the food chain, you are, at any point, you could be something else's lunch, and you need those fear centers to kick in, you know, instantly. So you either fight, flight, or play dead. But here we are in the 21st century, and you know, if you're in a business meeting and somebody asks you a really challenging question or something, you know, and you suddenly feel the adrenaline kick in, then you, I think you'd agree it's probably not appropriate to play dead, or to run out of the room screaming in terror, or to lean over and punch the person in the face as much as you might want to. None of those are particularly useful responses, and yet we feel driven to do those things. And we have to learn to see fear differently. So I think a really useful way of thinking about fear, in fact, there's a quote I heard from Tony Robbins years ago. It said, let fear be your counselor, not your jailer. So in other words, and my wording for that is let it wake you up and then let it go, because it has a message for you. You need to take the message and you need to do something intelligent with the message. But beyond that, you need to just let the fear go. So the physiological response, we have to let go of. And we're not very good at that. I think we hang on to things a lot, whether it's anger or frustration or resentment. I think we carry that stuff a lot. And that blocks our ability to learn and grow and respond effectively to what's going on.
I really concur with that, Peter. I've had this conversation with Ian in a one-on-one a week or so ago, and literally only in the last hour with our people and culture manager. Phase one of the COVID here in Australia and the lockdown, I went most of that first 8 to 10 weeks with literally no communication from direct leaders, my direct management and leadership, no one-on-one check-ins, you know, see how I'm tracking. I didn't hear from any family members at all. It's a very strong family business. And I was going to some real bad places, and ultimately got this phone call one day and said, if you're in town tomorrow at midday, you need to come to the office. So my mental space said, well, I'm losing my job. You know, I'm done. You know, I've had no communication, no engagement. I know other people in my same positions in other states are getting weekly. So I literally cleaned the car, did everything, and I went up there and well, that wasn't what I expected. I had this fear that I was gone, and after I had that meeting, I have no fear in anything that I'm doing at the moment in business and or work and or private. I've removed the fear. And in essence, you know, brought something else, you know, and heart leadership.
Sorry, Jamie. You said you've what to fear?
I've removed the fear. Yeah,
I removed it. Yeah.
You know, the fear of, am I performing? Am I not? Why aren't they talking to me? Why are they talking to others? You know, and I've actually replaced that with, well, I've been doing this now for 19 years. I probably don't need to. They trust me. They know that I'm going to have this covered. They know I'm going to be having the right conversations, blah, 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 blah. So they don't need to talk to me as much, but they do need to talk to the people that haven't had this experience before, you know. So completely took that fear away of my job and everything. And I'm in a far better space, you know.
You're absolutely right that what happens is we in the absence of information, will make up a story, and the story is rarely a reflection of reality. There's a great quote from Mark Twain, said, I've experienced a lot of terrible things in my life, and a few of them even happened.
Yeah.
So, you know, we do make up a lot of stories about stuff that, you know, it's our way of trying to have a sense of control, because we think we know what's going on. And we'll come on to this a bit more in the next piece, but you're absolutely right. I mean, what I would also say to you is that it's completely unrealistic to assume that you might not still lose your job at some point, if that makes sense. And that's
absolutely.
That's not to have you in a state of, anxiety. It's just a simple fact. And, you know, people talk about a safe job, a secure job, a permanent job. I think we all been around long enough to know there's no such thing.
No. And
I realized recently every company that I've ever worked for in my life, you know, I have my own business now, doesn't exist today. Not one of them. No. You know, they've changed form, they've been overtaken, they've closed down, whatever. They don't exist. And, you know, so that's life. Stuff comes and goes.
Yep.
One of the interesting one of the interesting things, I think, is I love this idea of the shift from fear to love. And I think, Jamie, that is a nice way of describing the journey you went on from having some anxiety to really having none. And it really was starting to not just, you know, love the work, but also love yourself, love the people, and so on. And it's actually a part of ancient wisdom, this idea. So there's timeless wisdom, ancient wisdom, whatever we want to call it. But one of the lines that comes from a very long time ago, the Christian folk borrowed it, but it's originally in the Sanskrit language, as far as I know, the oldest language in the world. But basically the line is that perfect love casts out fear. And so in any kind of situation, if we are feeling fearful, as soon as I think we should, my view is we should acknowledge it. I think you said, Peter, that it's valuable, but then we need to let it go. So the fear is valuable. It's waking us up, I think you said, which I think
has
is
a message, some information there for us. Yeah,
it's like a bit of a you know, tap on the shoulder or whatever it might be. But we don't need to sort of dwell there. We've got to kind of, I don't know, what do you think, folks? We've got to shift to love as soon as possible.
When you
hey,
think
Simone,
about, yes.
if you want to know what wisdom is, whenever words come out of the mouth of a man with a long grey beard, that's wisdom. I'm looking forward to a day when I might be able to grow one. I don't know whether I'll ever manage it, but there you
When you think about fear, fear is essentially a bodily response. It is an elevation of cortisol and an activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So you can really quite easily call into play the parasympathetic nervous system, and it is really quite simple to do that. And it is just essentially as simple as taking a couple of incredibly deep mindful breaths to pull that in. What we're starting to see though now is I guess people are having a sustained increased levels of cortisol, which is actually not good for people's health and mental health as well, because of COVID and the situation people are finding themselves in as such. And that sustained levels of cortisol over the period of not just a week or two, when a normal, you know, potentially significant stress happens, it's now occurring over a couple of months. And what we're starting to see is people are breaking down in that space, because essentially of a continuous barrage of media that generates the fear.
Or is it our allowance of the media to generate the fear?
Well, it's both, isn't it? It's both. But, I mean, I think a simple way to, you know, I say don't watch the news. You know, minimize your intake. I rarely watch it. One of the things I say is the news, NEWS. Think of it as standing for never, ever, whole story. Never, ever, whole story.
I love it.
It never is. It never is, and it's curated generally. You know, it's a race to the bottom of the brainstem. So it's the information that they know will engage us at the most visceral level, because that's what gets our attention.
It's that terrible saying in journalism: if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah. So it's just not healthy, and it's not helpful. So number one is we need to minimize their intake of that information, and number two, as Simone rightly said, we need to understand how to bring back the balance by engaging the parasympathetic nervous system. And I think it's two aspects. It is the physiological, so that really good deep rhythmic breathing, mindful breathing, and the psychological, which is to change the channel. So Jamie's example of, oh my God, I've been called in, that means I'm about to lose my job, blah, blah, blah. So psychologically, you send yourself into a place and you get yourself into this loop, because that then triggers the sympathetic nervous system. And the more that's triggered, the more the self-talk goes down a negative path. So it's that mindset. What's that quote? Everything will be all right in the end. If it's not all right, it's not the end. That quote.
Yeah.
You know, and the Stoic philosophy of how you engage with life and all of that, we desperately need to be learning that stuff and teaching that stuff.
Well, one of the things we're exploring in the Heart Leadership Program is to ignore the head first of all and start with the heart.
Yeah.
And actually, we've talked about this in, I think, not yesterday's session, but the first one we talked about, you actually might have to tell your brain to be quiet.
Yeah.
And engage the head later on, but start with the heart, because the heart is telling us the truth.
Interesting though, there is a place for the head as such, but that is in almost those prehistoric times. So, fear could actually be tied to learning, because if you didn't get killed by that saber-toothed tiger as such, well, that was a good outcome.
Yeah, indeed.
And that's why, that's very relevant to learning too, because the part of the brain that processes memory and the part of the brain that processes emotion are actually the same parts of the brain.
Yep.
And there's a evolution reason for that, because if you enter a part of the jungle and the tiger's there and you manage to escape the tiger, you want that memory there, so that when you enter that part of the jungle again, you're going to be much more cautious. So it has it's rooted in evolutionary biology. It makes perfect sense. The problem is that post-traumatic stress is where that emotion is so deeply rooted that it becomes irrational. And that's our biggest problem as human beings. And of course, the whole response to COVID, and there's a spectrum of views about it. I'm slightly on the end of towards the end of the spectrum. It says, I think humans have overreacted to this phenomenon. And I think the overreaction starts to create heightened response. It's almost like an autoimmune problem, when the immune system does what it's meant to do, but then it overreacts, so that's when people get allergies to things. It's almost like as a species, we're having an autoimmune reaction. So we're overreacting, we're getting too emotional about it. Politicians are very much knee-jerk response to media. I don't envy politicians. It's not an easy time to make any decisions. But I think there's a lot of reaction and overreaction going on personally.
So how do we, given that this is the situation that we're in, and I guess, Peter, this would lead us to one of the questions that we talked about as well. Our beliefs have got a lot to do with all of this. And some people's beliefs are significantly challenged by the current situation. The folks that want to keep us separate, of course, are ramming home this, message: if you're not with us, you must be against us, kind of thing. So there's a real challenge going on, isn't there, to our belief systems? Let's explore that for a bit.
Well, this is a massive topic, and I tend to bring it when I do a keynote speech. Like there's one that I do called Embracing Change in Uncertain Times, which has been very popular for the last 4 years because of Brexit. But of course, when COVID came along, Brexit almost became like a sideshow over here. But the thing about human beings is that we have an incredible desire for certainty. And the more we feel like we're in uncertain times, the more desperate we are for certainty. It's a little bit like seeing something, your ship, you're out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and your ship's just gone down, and you find something that that floats that you can cling on to because you're in this ocean of uncertainty. absolutely freaking out, and you find something that you feel you can be certain about. So you hang on to that for dear life. And I think as human beings, it's almost like an existential crisis, because we think we want to have control of everything. And the more we try to control things, I think the less control we actually have. And so that desperation for certainty will attract us to certainty of beliefs. And so I have this notion of a belief spectrum. So if you imagine a line with the center is 0, and then you go +1, +2, +3, and in the other direction you go -1, -2, -3. And on any topic at all, we will sit on that belief spectrum. So on some topics, we'll be right in the middle. We just don't have a view either way, and we probably don't even particularly care. And on some topics, we might say, well, I suspect that's true, or I suspect that's false, or I believe, or +2 would be, I believe that to be true, I strongly believe it. And -2 would be, I strongly doubt it. But when we get to +3, we say, I know that's true. And -3 is, I know that's false. And that's when we get into trouble. Mark Twain, who I love to quote, has some beautiful quotes. And one that I saw, did anyone see the movie The Big Short?
I have.
So
No. Simone's nodding.
Yep.
Yeah, if you haven't seen The Big Short, it's a beautiful example of human arrogance and stupidity, because it's based on a true story leading up to the financial crash in 2008. Because the entire system was being built on it was a house of cards built on an illusion.
This is the Michael Lewis book, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I've not read the book.
Yeah,
The movie's brilliant. So there was a bunch of guys that cottoned on to the fact that this is not going to end well. So they bet against the market, which everyone thought they were crazy, but they made millions out of it because they knew what was coming. But at the very beginning of the movie, there is this quote appeared. I'd never seen it before. And it's Mark Twain. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so.
Yep.
Now, this is the big problem we face, because human beings are desperate for certainty. Like, we want to believe certain things. And so therefore, when we come across any ideas or information that might conflict with that belief we hold, we will rationalize it away. We'll use our intelligence to rationalize it away, or we'll discredit the source of the information so that we can maintain the belief, because that's what's called cognitive dissonance. When you hold a belief and something else comes along that contradicts that belief, and you know, human beings are not capable of holding two conflicting ideas. So because it makes us uncomfortable. So what we'll do is we'll stick with one and we'll reject the other one.
And yet, Scott Fitzgerald, the guy that wrote The Great Gatsby, among other great books, said that he thought that was a sign of first-rate intelligence, was the ability to hold two views in the mind at once.
Absolutely. And if you think about the what are they called in the Eastern traditions, koans, the paradox. So an example I learned from a colleague years ago was go slow to go fast. You know, we're in a culture that values speed. So, you know, the quicker things get done, the better in our view. But as we know, lots of stupid decisions, I mean, I've made them at massive expense to myself, made decisions quickly. You know, what is it? Decide in haste and repent at leisure. Or it's like that other saying that, you know, carpenters use, measure twice, cut once. You know, we're very reactive as human beings. We knee-jerk decisions. Yep, this is the right thing to do. I'm going to do this. And there's not enough thought. And that's wisdom, really. It's stopping and reflecting and taking your time. So I think that's a major issue for us. And we're all incredibly prone to do this. You know, I think that reactivity and desire to solve something quickly because we desperately want certainty is going to be the unmaking of us of a species unless we can overcome that and be more wise and thoughtful.
I've got a little mantra that might be helpful around this, which is based on Viktor Frankl's idea that between stimulus and response, there's a space.
Yeah.
And in that space is a choice. And he says that therein lies our freedom.
Exactly.
So one of the things that I've been playing with a lot as I work through the heart leadership space is to ignore the mind in the first instance and just listen to the heart, and to ask myself what response is appropriate to this situation that wouldn't be a reaction. It's a little game I kind of play, and you can do it in a split second even. Because, you know, I think we've trained ourselves, or I certainly have, I've trained myself to react. A lot of it for me, Jamie, you'd be familiar with this, comes from my sporting background. One of the games that I excelled in was cricket. And you know, you're always taught that your first reaction often isn't the best one, particularly as a batsman.
Well, you know, often reactions are habitual as well.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So this idea that we've sort of trained ourselves, and you're right, you're exactly right, Simone. They've become habits, and it's kind of
So the stimulus response collapses to become one, and that's instant reaction, and many times it suits us very well. It's quite adaptive, actually, you know, to do that. But unfortunately, a lot of decisions we're making in life and in business require us to pull those apart. So an example of go slow to go fast was I read an interview years ago when Justin King took over Sainsbury's, the big supermarket chain here in the UK. He said that when I arrived as the new CEO of Sainsbury's, he said, I made a decision that I was going to make no major decisions for a number of months. Now, often when a new leader comes in, they feel under enormous pressure to do something very quickly because they want to be seen to be bringing change because everyone's watching them. The shareholders are watching them. The investors are watching, you know, everyone's watching them and wanting to see something. And he said, I made a deliberate decision to make no major decisions for a number of months. Instead, what I did was I went around the business and I met people at all levels, right across the whole business, because I really wanted to understand this business. I mean, he came from Asda, Walmart, so he knew the industry, but he didn't know that business, and he wanted to really understand it. Now, that achieved two things. Number one is he really got to tap into what was really going on there, so he could understand it. And number two, he got far more engagement from the people. Because when a new CEO arrives and says, right, we're going to do this, this, and this, you're all doing it wrong, I'm going to show you how to do it, immediately it gets everyone's backs up. And, you know, that's an example of go fast to go slow, because now you've got resistance everywhere and it's really, really difficult.
It's also a great sign of leadership. You know, the great leaders ask questions. The real leaders, the fake leaders only have answers.
Yeah, exactly.
But in a way, you look at the motivations as well of those two examples. So that the latter is very intrinsically motivated. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that for my own benefit in a way. Whereas the former is very much extrinsically motivated. This is around acclimatizing within the company, understanding the company, understanding the people and the relationships that you build with the people as well.
Yeah, And that's an example of go slow to go fast. Take the time to do that. Go for the quality communication and quality relationships. So one of the things, I teach about communication is that, quality trumps quantity every time. People say we need more communication. No, you don't need more. You need better communication. And it's that quality and it's that heart-centered stuff where there's real connection. Something popped into my head the other day. You need connection before direction. You need connection before direction. And that was what Justin King was essentially doing. He was building connection with the people before setting the direction. And then he's more likely to have people come with him.
So this go slow to go fast is really, that's one way to love living in your learning zone, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the take.
Well, it's a full learning zone in that space. You're learning about the intricacies of a company, or you're learning about the relationships, you're learning about the culture, you're learning about how things are done, the processes that are followed or not followed, the systems and everything like that.
Yep, spot on.
Yeah, wonderful. So I'm sensing that, and it's another topic, Peter, we've been exploring in the Heart Leadership Program, is all about the slow movement, and how we really need to slow down, and that the positive of the virus and all its challenges is it's kind of forced us.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's sort of this. It's an example of things are getting better and worse at the same time, isn't it? I think Simone's point about the amount of fear that's being generated, and we're facing a tsunami of mental health challenges, globally right now. I think in a way it's amplified what was already there. I think there were a lot of problems already there. As you were saying before everyone else came on the call, Ian, that this whole crisis has highlighted a whole lot of underlying issues that were already there.
Yeah.
And it's the same with...
it was never spoken about, ever,
No.
the mental health. And I mean, when I was in the industry, I was shocked when I moved out of the industry, how little it was spoken about. And that for me was a massive...
What industry is that, Simone?
I used to be mental health too, neuroscience. So when I moved out, one of my largest culture shocks was the lack of knowledge or understanding or even discussion around mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now I think my take is that it's talked about a lot, but not understood very well.
No.
And I think that's, it's highlighted. I mean, one of the things Peter and I were talking about before we all came together was about, the aged care industry in Australia has been, we've known of a lot of the challenges a long time before the virus. And yet, we didn't address them. And I think the reason we didn't is tied up in all of the things we're talking about: fear, uncertainty, beliefs, separateness, all the reasons why we've ignored some of the things, and that our situation is now amplifying these things, I think is tied up in all the things we're talking about. And I see this as a beautiful opportunity to go to a different level in so many ways in our organizations and in our homes and in all the places where we gather. This is an opportunity, once in a lifetime opportunity.
So coming back to what you were saying, Ian, about the COVID is, as I said, it's amplified everything, the good stuff and the bad stuff. But, that slowing down thing, I think, was fascinating. It was a fascinating experience to... Well, I was in London. The last time I was in London, it's almost 6 months ago now. I used to be in London regularly. I live 2 hours west of London, but the last time I was in London was the 17th of March. And it was quite a surreal experience because I was in the West End of London, Regent Street, Oxford Street. and there were hardly any cars and hardly any people. It was just the most surreal experience.
Mm.
And then, of course, that was the week before we went into lockdown here. And then suddenly, we sort of walked down to the local shops and there's no cars on the road. It was just an amazing experience. You could hear the birds singing. It was like, so there was something special about it. And, I definitely feel for people who are locked up in a inner city apartment with 3 kids or something. I mean, it must have been a nightmare for those people. We were one of the blessed ones who live in a lovely location. We've got a nice garden. We're just on the edge of a city. In 5 minutes I can be in the countryside. It's like, it was special. We had time with the family. It was brilliant. But for some people it would have been a living nightmare. But culturally, everyone had to stop. Everything stopped and slowed down, and it was quite an experience. And people started to, I'm sure it's changed people forever, because some people are saying, I used to commute, particularly here in the UK. People commute stupid amounts of time. I mean, it's, hour and a half, 2 hours. Some people commute each way.
Same thing here. There's a lot of people in where Simone and I are. So we're Geelong, Peter.
Yeah.
So, the hour and 10-minute train ride to Melbourne is just, if you go peak hour, you never get a seat. And, it's the same time sort of coming back. And of course, all that traffic on the road. I mean, I've lived in this part of the world now for nearly 8 years, and I've driven to Melbourne 9 times. And on each of those occasions, I was trying to find another way. Because why would you want to spend all that time in the traffic?
So I think, so one of the good things is I think people are starting to realize they don't have to go into the office all the time. They don't have to travel 2 hours for a single meeting. We can do things differently. So I think.
So this is another way, isn't it? It's really maximizing. There was a great question somebody asked in yesterday's Heart Leadership session. It was around, what's the purpose of the office today? Fascinating question, because it's changed, hasn't it? And those that I was talking to a CEO of a 1,500 employee organisation a few days ago, and they got this problem. What are we going to do with all of our buildings we're leasing? Where the landlords, there's the government's putting pressure on landlords not to do things, but when it's all said and done, there's going to be a day of reckoning, in his words. So now, Simone, you had something earlier that, do you still have it?
I don't have it, but I've got something else instead.
Okay.
Let's have that then.
And this goes into your comment that you made before, that people have a set intent or thing in mind, and despite all evidence, they're willing to disregard it if it doesn't align with their set mindset. As well, mindset is set as such in ways. But the council that I work for have just put shovel in the ground for a $100 million brand new office last week. And I sit there at the start of COVID, I'm sitting there, asking the questions, do we need this? And the response to it and how they're selling it to ratepayers is that this will employ 500 people in the build process for local jobs and local construction. And I'm still sitting there going, but it's going to be an empty building. Like how?
But think of the jobs. Think of employment. We need more employment.
That's what they're selling. And I look at it and I just don't even know. Like that, I'm annoyed because I'm a ratepayer.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And my money's going towards that. And I'm like, but it's going to be an empty building moving forward. But it hasn't aligned with what people's mindset is moving forward. People are still thinking we're going to go back to a normal world and that people will want to return to the office. But what I see is that people are learning and have learned, and people have amazing capacity to learn. And this is just showing how much capacity that they have to learn when they have to around the uptake of technology and the ability to interact using technology. And if you'd have asked that of, that CEO that you just mentioned there, Ian, would we be able to shift our whole staff to online? They would have just gone, how? That's not going to happen.
Wouldn't have even been considered.
Correct.
No.
But people have had this amazing capacity to learn all this because in ways, fear has driven them, but also they've had to, that there's been no choice. So people have shown that they can learn when push comes to shove too.
Absolutely. It's interesting
And
how, we're very adaptable. And wasn't that the often misquoted Darwin line about the survival of the fittest? The actual line is that those that will thrive are those that are most able to adapt to change. But he often gets misquoted on that. But we are incredibly adaptable, and we're proving it.
Yep.
We're incredibly flexible. I mean, one of the things I saw on Twitter the other day, which is an interesting thing, where everyone's trying to lynch the Premier of Victoria, Dan Andrews, who I personally think is doing a pretty good job, and I think he'll be proved that he's been right as we go in the other direction. But one of the interesting things about all that is that there's a whole lot of people, because of their own fear. Like it was obvious in the comments that it's their own fear that was driving their comments. And it was going back to this thing, Peter, you're talking about the uncertainty. And people were saying things like, the vast majority of Victorians, are fed up with this and blah, 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 blah. And someone said, well, hang on a minute, how do you know that? And they said, in my experience, the vast majority of people aren't fed up at all. They actually think this is a good thing, and it'll prove to be valuable, in the long term. And so, but there was this whole debate sort of going on that really was based in, I guess, some people's uncertainty, but other people's certainty. I found it fascinating to observe. Maybe that's the thing about leadership going forward and learning, is how do we help people have certainty?
How we help people have certainty?
Because if that's what we want, and if that's what if the human's looking for certainty,
the only certainty is that everything's uncertain. I think that's one of those paradoxes that we have to be willing to live with. And I think this is central to the whole endeavor of learning, is that I think the biggest challenge we have as human beings is that we want to be in control. We actually think we want to be in control. We want to feel in control, and it freaks us out when we're not. So in my talks on embracing change in uncertain times, I put up the yin yang symbol. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, yin yang symbol, the black and the white thing. And the concept is complementary opposites. So they need each other, and life is about finding a way to live between these two apparently opposite states of being. But one of the complementary opposites is order and chaos. So if you work in accounting or law, for example, your job is to bring order to chaos, because if it wasn't for accountants or legal professionals, it'd be sort of a free for all. People wouldn't know where things were at, and everyone would make up their own rules, and we wouldn't know whether we're making a profit or a loss. We definitely need order and structure and process. If you imagine starting a business on day one, then on day one of the business, it's chaos, because no one's clear what has to happen when, who's going to do what. That's day one. But what day one of the business has is incredible energy. That's the sort of the energy of chaos. But if you want a business to be scalable, you know, you can replicate, open up in new markets and so on, then obviously you have to have structure and order and process. If you want it to be saleable, it has to be in a form that you can sell it as a going concern. So order is really important, but we have this thing where we're afraid of chaos. We don't like it, and we're incredibly uncomfortable with chaos. But the thing about chaos is it's a requirement for any type of change or growth, because whilst order is important in a business that cannot navigate through chaos and internalize chaos is not going to survive. So the best example, and I'm sure it's similar in Australia, but high street retailers, some of the big high street retailers in this country that have been going for over a century have either gone out of business or their backs are against the wall right now. And these are businesses that have survived wars and recessions and everything, but the disruption of the online market has decimated those businesses. And when a business is so ossified and this is the way we've always done it and this is our success formula, they can't survive because the world's changing. And if you're not willing to enter chaos and you think your order is going to see you through, it's not. And so one of the things I've said for many years is that great leaders are people who either bring order to chaos. So when a business is in a mess, you get a certain type of leader who comes in and they sort everything out, and people say, thank God, now we know what's going on. Now we know who's doing what. Now we know where we're going. But other times you have businesses that are so structured and ordered that they're ossified. And that's when you need the type of leader who brings in some chaos. So they actually break things up, and people will resist that like anything. That, no, we don't want to do this. We've always done it this way. And this leader will be strong enough to say, I'm sorry, but it's all going to change. And they will rip things apart. And that's the only way you can reform a business, because reform means to deconstruct what already exists and then create a different form of order. I don't know if I'm making sense here.
Well, it's a similar thing to normal. You know, there is really, at the end of the day, there's no such thing as a new normal. You know, it's just a play on words. I've played on it myself. But it's another thing. Like we could say, you know, order, normal is order. Status quo is another term that, you know, is used. But I think the thing is to know when the status quo or order or normal, when are these things no longer serving us?
So when has it outlived its usefulness? So
when is it out? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I you know, sometimes I'll talk about the Maslow's learning model. So, you know, the unconscious incompetence, you don't know what you can't do. Then the conscious incompetence, you realize what you can't do. Then conscious competence, where you have to think about it. And then unconscious competence, you do it without thinking. You know, we all drive cars without really thinking about it because it's become habitual. And so, you know, what I'll say to people is, so habits are really useful. You know, in the UK, in Australia, driving on the left-hand side of the road is a really good habit. But if you find yourself in North America or Europe, it's a habit that's not going to serve you at all. So we have to then go around the cycle again and relearn. You know, we have to unlearn. I think this is one of our challenges, is that we avoid the discomfort of learning because it requires us to unlearn our old success formula that might have served us for 10 years, 20 years, or for high street retailers, 120 years. You know, that no longer works.
No, it was a great insight, wasn't it? I think from Alvin Toffler in Future Sock, which was written in the 70s.
Yeah, amazing.
But he predicted that the future belonged to those who were willing to learn, relearn, and unlearn. I think that, I don't recall the exact phrase, but very, very insightful. I mean, one of the questions I've been asking, for example, Has urbanization outlived its usefulness? Has globalization outlived its usefulness? Have some of the things, like I think the financial system has definitely outlived its usefulness.
Long ago. Yeah.
The health system is the same. The aged care system,
Yeah.
you know, the childcare system, you know, you could just about name most of the major industries. They've all had in some way, the status quo is no longer serving us. And so we have this opportunity to reinvent, reform, whatever language we want to use, and learning is a key to get to going through the process.
So here's an example of some timeless wisdom that I really want to share because it's so relevant to this topic. So I grew up in the Christian tradition, so I was kind of more familiar with various passages from the Bible. And there is something from the New Testament that never made sense to me. So it comes from Sermon on the Mount, and it's the the quote is, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Now, if you're a Monty Python fan, you'll remember Life of Brian, where they're squabbling about what he actually said. Was it the Greeks? You know, what was it that he said? But the quote is, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Now, I could never, for most of my life, I could never make sense of that. I thought there must be something, there's probably some underlying wisdom in that statement, but I couldn't get my head around it because it seemed to me that it's not the mild, gentle, humble people who are running the show. You know, whether we're talking politics or business, generally speaking, they're not the people in charge or running, you know, apparently running the show. So it made no sense to me. And that quote came from a time when the Roman Empire was, you know, very strong. You didn't mess with the Romans, you know. So what did that quote mean? Couldn't make sense of it at all. And then later I began to realize what I think it means, because here's another quote that is half a millennium earlier in a different part of the world. That's why I believe it's timeless wisdom. So this quote comes from the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. So we're talking ancient China. This quote says, "The hard and inflexible will be broken. The hard and inflexible will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail." It's essentially the same statement made 5 centuries earlier in a different part of the world. And if you think of things like water and rocks, you know, a rock is hard, water is soft. Water drips onto a rock, makes no difference. But over time, it does make a difference. It wears it away. Or you'll see little weeds, little plants breaking through concrete and asphalt. There was a documentary on Discovery Channel I saw years ago called Life After Humans. Has anyone ever seen that?
Yep.
Yeah, Simone.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. So they were speculating that what the planet would look like if human beings disappeared instantly, like we were all gone. What would the world look like after a year, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years? And what was mind-blowing is that after a couple of centuries, there would be hardly any evidence that we were ever here. Everything we'd built would have been destroyed pretty much. The pyramids would probably still be there.
The living example that they showed was Chernobyl.
Yeah.
I missed that one. Just remind me.
The living example is Chernobyl.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, with basically no humans can basically enter that, and you can actually start to see that nature has started to fully reclaim that area.
Yeah,
amazing. There was a thing on 60 Minutes about it not that long ago, and yeah, you could not believe what happened there 20 odd years ago, considering the overgrowth and the regrowth that's happened in that space.
So you know, this is the whole point: is that human beings with our very rigid, controlling approach to the world, we're just kidding ourselves. We don't control. You know, we're not running this show. Like the late comedian, you know, George Carlin said, people are obsessed about saving the planet. He said, are you kidding me? The planet's absolutely fine. The people are fucked. It's like, it's just ridiculous thinking that we can control everything and that we've got.
When you talk about climate change, and you say, there's no planet B or no like that, it's the problem isn't the planet. The planet will still survive. It just won't be survivable for humans.
That's right.
I'm incredibly. I just can't believe that people don't see that. But the interesting thing, though, I think, is that there are things that we can control, and that to me seems to be the key. It's like I'm in control of my feelings. I'm in control of my thoughts. Pretty much.
Can be. Yes.
Pretty much, I'm in control of my actions. And with those three things, I have a decision to make all the time.
That's kind of where it stops, though, doesn't it, Ian?
Yeah, but to me, it's like someone was saying to me, all this, the question was, how have you negatively been affected by the virus? And my response was, I haven't been affected at all. The only thing that's really changed is I can't see my children or my grandson. I can't go and visit them. I can't go and visit some of my friends. I can't go and have breakfast with Jamie, which I used to enjoy.
Which we enjoy.
Which we enjoy on a monthly basis. I can't do that right now. But apart from those sort of things, really, I'm still in control of how I feel, how I think, and what I do. That hasn't changed.
And I've only found positives out of it, to be honest.
I mean, Jamie, you've literally transformed your mindset. I've always had trouble with the word mindset because it's got set in it. Which but anyway, but you've literally transformed yourself and your operation in this time, and good on you for doing so.
But in a number of ways, it's been financially beneficial to my family. My bank balance has not looked this good in the 29 years of marriage. Because I'm a spender, I'm a shopper. And I can't go and spend and shop, and I don't really like buying online. So, so the bank balance just keeps going up and up and up.
Too bad for the retailers, but
well, they're still getting plenty. Don't worry about that. It's the toys that I buy that I'm not buying. So.
Well, that's true. I think we start to realise what's important, and we don't buy as much unnecessary crap.
No, correct. Yeah. And we've been decluttering, which is something Ian's been talking about. And through the Heart Leadership stuff, it's about declutter your mind, declutter your workstation, throw out some old clothes, clean out the shed. I have made more money out of decluttering than I was making buying the stuff and putting it in there in the first place.
I was saying to Carol earlier today, I'm so glad I've got 2 pairs of jeans because they're the only trousers I've worn for 6 months. And I literally put all my suits and all that stuff in a bag.
Yeah.
Recently, I kept one. To be truthful, I kept one. So I've gone from having 7 suits to 1. And as I was putting that in the bag to, eventually I'll take it to the Salvos or wherever. But what on earth was I thinking that I needed so much stuff, and all of these other things, as well. That what were we thinking?
Yeah.
I think the answer is we weren't. We weren't thinking all that much.
Just to go back to that timeless wisdom thing. So blessed are the meek, they shall inherit the earth. The hard and inflexible will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail. And that very much accords with the Darwin, or the quote that's ascribed to Darwin, which is the species that survive and thrive are not the strongest, but those most adaptive to change. So all of those things to me represent timeless wisdom. And there's a common issue here, and that is one of vulnerability, which, once again, our desire to be in control is to avoid being vulnerable. Whenever I ask an audience, complete this sentence, to be vulnerable is to be, 99% of the time people say the word weak. So in our culture, vulnerability and weakness are actually synonymous. We think, I don't want to be vulnerable, so I'll do everything I can to avoid being vulnerable. And so what's really interesting for those of you who, watch TED Talks, that the fourth most watched TED Talk ever, with almost 50 million views, is called The Power of Vulnerability by Brené Brown, which some of you may have seen. But if you haven't seen it, watch it. If you have seen it, watch it again, because the reason her talk became so popular is it speaks to all of us about the need to embrace vulnerability rather than avoid it.
Is it not the key to learning and relearning and unlearning? The willingness to
it absolutely is, and that's why it's core to this whole piece around love living in your learning zone. So what she's saying is, rather than spending time and money and energy trying to avoid vulnerability, which most of us do, whether she said, when you feel uncomfortable, have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin, to try and feel better about myself. We spend money, we buy toys, we do all kinds of things to avoid feeling vulnerable, take drugs, legal or illegal drugs. And she's saying that really, if you want to have a fulfilling and successful life, you have to embrace vulnerability. There is no other way. So, let's get with it and do it. So I have a diagram of a circle, which we refer to as the comfort zone, and then therefore everything outside it by definition is uncomfortable. And our response to discomfort is to see it as danger, because it's unknown, it's unpredictable, and we don't feel in control. We are vulnerable the moment we step out of our comfort zone, and that's true. It doesn't matter who you are, you will have a comfort zone. There's a quote, and I thought it was Gandhi, but I can't find the origin of the quote, but it says, each of us live within a circle, the circumference of which is our fear. So basically, however big your comfort zone, it has an edge, and that edge is fear, because beyond that is a world that you don't know. And in that world, you're going to feel out of control because you don't understand it. You've never been there. It's unpredictable and it feels dangerous. And therefore we want to retreat back to what feels comfortable. So the way to consider that space just beyond your comfort zone is call it the learning zone, because in that world, you will feel adrenaline, you will feel vulnerable, but rather than label the adrenaline as fear, label it as excitement, because now you're truly alive, because you're thinking, I don't know what's going to happen here. Like one of my signature stories is that in May 2000, I flew into Heathrow Airport with my wife and our 5-year-old son. And we arrived here on a one-way ticket from Australia, and we had nowhere to live. I mean, literally nowhere to live. And we had no work lined up, and we had a 5-year-old ready to start school. So we were definitely vulnerable. And yet the emotion wasn't, the dominant emotion wasn't fear, it was excitement, because it was an adventure. And there was a little bit of fear there, which is let it wake you up, because if I sat around and did nothing, we very soon would, we'd have no money and we'd be in serious trouble. But the predominant sense was, this is an exciting adventure. We don't know exactly where we're going to live and what we're going to do, but whatever happens, it's going to be okay. It'll be fine. We'll find a way. And that's the mindset you need, really, whenever you're in that unknown space, is a sense of adventure, excitement, courage, curiosity. These are really key to stepping beyond what we already know.
So I had a mental picture, Peter, of, and this may well be your model, and maybe you can send it to me and I'll send it on to folks, but
sure.
I had this mental picture of three circles, the smallest circle being comfort zone, the next circle being learning zone.
That's it.
And the next circle being discomfort zone.
Yeah, or danger zone.
Or danger zone. But the doorway to learning zone is vulnerability. Or the bridge.
Absolutely. It's the only way. There is no other way. If we try to avoid it, that's Brené Brown's message. If we try to avoid it, then it just ain't going to happen. So there's a book I read years ago called Not Knowing. It's actually written by an Australian and a Brit. Stephen D'Souza is the Brit. Deanna Renner, I think Deanna's based in Melbourne. So they wrote this book called Not Knowing, and the subtitle is The Art of Turning Uncertainty into Opportunity. So what they're it's quite a fun book to read, but what they're advocating is we have to keep stepping to that edge all the time, because the opportunities exist in the unknown. And that's the world we're in right now.
Yeah, indeed. Fascinating. Now, Donovan, I've left you off the hook today because you've been contemplating in the background there, but we are almost at the top of the hour. So we're looking for final thoughts, and then I'll let Peter sort of summarize it all. But I like this idea, comfort zone. There's a bridge. It's called vulnerability. Takes you to learning zone, and it's an ever growing sort of thing. That would be my takeaway.
Yep.
Donovan, you're.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll just say thank you for your time today, Peter. Really appreciated you sharing your insights and experience around the
Pleasure. Sorry we didn't hear more of your voice, Donovan.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I was quite
the wisest person in the room is probably the one who's not speaking.
I'll take that. Yeah.
For me, again, thank you, Peter. Second or third time I've heard you talk, and always take something away from it. I think the order and chaos complementing each other really resonated a bit with me. I sort of, obviously wrote here that sort of chaos is required for best practice, structure, and growth. So I think it's sort of how you put it. So some really good learnings, and I love that because we explored it yesterday too. The go slow to go fast. For me personally, not getting 5 hours sleep, get out of bed, jump in the car, run my heart out for 10, 11 hours, come home, have tea, be absolutely crashed, and then get up, go to bed, go and do it again. That was my normal, and that's what I thought I needed to do. Phase one of COVID kept me doing that. I didn't want. My business said, stay home. You're not to be out in the field. You're not to be out there. You're not to be out. It's too dangerous. And then I looked at my teams all around Victoria, and I went, they're short staffed. They're too busy. Someone's sick. So I went double crazy, 12-hour, 14-hour days.
Wow.
And then I crashed. As everyone was able to start going back out, then I hit rock bottom. And so what I've actually done is gone very slow, to the point that I'm quite enjoying. That's why I'm saying long may parts of this COVID continue for me personally, because the set the alarm at 7, generally laying there by 6 o'clock, but getting out of bed at 7, cruising into the shop, between 8 and 8:30, having a real structured morning. Go downstairs, have some conversations with some people, go home and have lunch with my wife every day, come back, have another structured 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon, and by 3:30, 4 o'clock, let's pack the computer up and go home. So I really, that also resonated. The go slow, to go fast. Yeah,
so it's saved your life in a way, Jamie.
I would. I was never going to drive the car into a tree or do, but it's certainly
might have had a heart attack, mate.
Might have had a heart attack, mate. Yes, absolutely. But so no, I appreciate wonderful session. So thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Peter. I am a learner lover, and I love living in my learning zone. And it's these guys.
To the converted, are we?
Yeah. Oh, always. I stepped out of neuroscience to make myself uncomfortable. I've done quite a few moves to make myself uncomfortable, and it is that excitement and that adrenaline, but it's my choice to inject that adrenaline at those specific times, if that makes sense. So, and as these guys know, I've moved out of my heartland of strategy of managing 10 to 15 people just this week to manage 700 people in a completely different industry. Pools, gyms, aquatics, swim, sport, leisure stuff.
Interesting time to be in that field.
But I've specifically done it to go into a learning zone. It is out of my comfort zone. And it was funny when you're talking about that between the danger zone versus the learning zone versus a comfort zone. And people's perceptions of that can differ as well. And you go, well, what does a strategist have to do? Or ex-neuroscientist turned strategist, turned, manager of 700 people. That's a pretty big step away from that core. But I actually see in myself that I've got quite a big learning zone, or test, like my danger zone, or the way that I view where my danger zone is quite far away from my comfort zone. So it's in that learning zone that I feel that I'm okay in that space. I guess that's what I've taken in that as I was trying to reconcile in my head whether I wanted to pursue that opportunity, that learning opportunity, or not.
Wonderful. I think we look back on our lives, and well, certainly for me, the best years of my life, the ones that stand out to me are the ones when I was always in that learning zone. New environment, new job, new career, new country. All of those are the highlights of life for me, because I think that's when you're truly alive and engaging with the world in a very different way than the same old, just doing the same thing over and over again.
And look, I think emotionally and mentally, spiritually and physically, we can do that. We can do that as often as we choose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now that's the beauty of, because they're the things that we are in control of, and we can make choices in those areas. But I love this idea, Simone, that your danger zone is a long way away, which I think that's a fascinating thing. In other words, we can grow this learning zone. So we might have this, this tiny sort of circle that's the comfort zone, but then we've got this big learning zone, and the danger zone is quite far away. I love that insight.
Yeah, me too. It's a good one.
So Peter, last word for you.
I don't have anything much more to say. I think, I've enjoyed the session with you all. I know I've probably done most of the talking. Would have been nice to hear some other voices, but I hope it was useful to people. And yeah, it's just remembering, if you're feeling uncomfortable, that's a good thing. Vulnerability, as Brené Brown said, vulnerability is our most accurate measure of courage. By definition, if you're not feeling vulnerable, you're not being courageous. The other thing I say is, people often say knowledge is power. I would rather say not knowing is growing. It's what you don't know that's actually, you need to befriend that and explore and grow. So that's it in a nutshell. Speaking of Brené Brown, I highly recommend an interview that Russell Brand does with Brené Brown. That would be interesting. I haven't seen that one. It's absolutely fascinating and at times hilarious.
I should probably add around Brené Brown and that infamous TED Talk. She had her TED Talk all planned out. She practiced it and that, and for whatever reason, when she touched down and she went into the studio, she threw it all away, and she said, "I'm just gonna speak from the heart." Wow. And she threw that whole talk away, and none of it was preempted as such. Is that right? So when you talk about being vulnerable, she put herself in one of the most vulnerable places in that space, and she went home, she forgot about it, and about 6 months later she had people from around the world ringing her, calling her up about that TED Talk, which she'd forgotten about because the world had then latched onto it, and she was like, oh my god, that was probably one of the worst performances of my life because I threw everything out. But that was her being vulnerable in that moment. That's a really interesting story. I wasn't aware of that.
but I think it shines through, doesn't it? Because it was very authentic from the heart. I mean, she must have followed an approximate script because she had slides.
There were slides that, yeah.
But the way she presented it, the wording wasn't the original script exactly. And then if you've not seen it, the Listening to Shame one that she did 18 months later, that TED Talk, is also brilliant because she looks back at that and what she went through herself around feeling vulnerable, that she thought that she was freaking out that hundreds of people might be seeing that TED Talk and wanting to actually steal it, and so that it couldn't be spread. It's hilarious.
Wonderful. And I just while you guys are talking, I just looked up the Theodore Roosevelt quote, which she uses, of course, in her book.
Oh yes,
greatly.
The Man in the Arena.
The Man in the Arena. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions? Who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who at the best knows, in the end, the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Apart from the masculine language, it's still a good insight. So on that note, I wish you all well as to dare greatly and to step out of your comfort zone and into the learning zone, and may it be as wide as Simone's.
All right, thanks guys. See ya.
Thanks guys, really appreciate that. Thanks, Ian.
Bye.
Thanks, Peter. See you guys.